Hi, and welcome to another episode of Queer, Black, and Awkward. I'm your host, Orion, and you are now tuning into space. I don't know if I'm going to keep continuing saying that, but I'm saying it now. Today I have next to me
Bill.
And he's going to be my guest for this week's episode. I appreciate you folks listening or watching on YouTube. I appreciate it. I also appreciate if you guys left, a rating, a thumbs up, downs, 1 star, 3, 4, anything. I appreciate it. So if you don't mind introducing yourself, Bill.
Yeah, so my name is Bill. I am a community organizer and an artist. I do a lot of stuff around just understanding stories and healing and how we navigate around space. And part of that comes from kind of my identity as a first generation queer Chinese immigrant, as someone who spent half of my life in Nanjing, like in the village near China, and also parts of my life here on Turtle Island. So yeah, it's a little bit about me.
Okay, that's interesting. So before I dive into the questions, I usually ask my guests what's their mood and color. So I'll go first and then you can tell me yours. My mood is joyful and my color is black since I'm wearing all black.
So my mood is probably content, and I think I would go with like a pastel pink, because I really love pastel colors, and it's like very calming. It has a calming presence.
Mm-hmm. No, I feel that. I feel that about any pastel colors. It really is very soothing. So you mentioned that you were born in Nanjing.
In Nanjing, yeah.
Nanjing. When did you move to? It was Vancouver, you said.
Yeah, Vancouver.
Vancouver.
So I was born in Nanjing and I moved to Vancouver when I was 9, after my parents divorced, and my mom took me to Vancouver. Just really spontaneous. It was a very spontaneous decision.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were you shocked, or when in the moment do you remember how you felt?
Yeah, I was definitely very shocked. I don't remember too much about what the specific scenario was, but I think it was just one day getting home from school, because my mom was working in Hungary for 5 years, so most of my childhood up until then. And then suddenly I see her just at home when I got home, and she was like, "Hey, by the way, I'm taking you to Canada next year." And I had no idea what Canada even was. I was like, "Is that a food? Is that a restaurant? What is that?" And she was like, "No, we're going to a new country, and we're gonna stay there." And I was like, "Oh, that's weird."
That's interesting. It's just being a little kid and then overnight your whole environment and structure just changes.
Yeah, changes. I think that's also part of why I'm really interested in navigating around healing work and kind of intergenerational trauma and things like that, because I think a lot of these changes and these decisions are made by a lot of the traumas that our parents, those who came before them, went through, for them to actually have to go through even all of these further changes.
Yeah. No, I feel that. Would you say over the years since you've immigrated to North America, how has your journey been in terms of connecting or staying connected with your culture?
I think since I've moved to Canada, it's been ups and downs. I think the ups has been finding other queer and trans Chinese folks who also do community organizing, who are aware of different forms of power in society and their own toxic behaviors, and talking with them and just having them hold space for me. A particular one that I can think of is when I was doing organizing in Vancouver's downtown Chinatown side and like finding other queer Chinese young folks.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the difficult part is like not being caught up in the Chinese community that like my parents are a part of and seeing that as the whole Chinese community. Oops. Seeing that as the whole Chinese community, because I think a lot of the times like we just see that vision that like our parents created, and then we
Mm-hmm.
see it that as like everything,
Yeah.
and it's hard to believe that because you know that that's toxic,
Mm-hmm.
but then leaving that at the same time feels like you're almost like sometimes it feels like you're a sellout, like you're leaving your whole community.
Yeah.
And now you're gonna leave everything
Mhm.
behind, right?
Right? I feel that sometimes too.
And then on top of that, they like gaslight you, and
Yeah.
then like a bit of guilt tripping, and you're just like, where am I right now?
No, I feel that honestly too, because like with my Caribbean culture and then like the North American culture, like I feel like when I embrace that, the North American culture, people also call me like a sellout, or they're just like, oh, you're not really,
You're not really.
Caribbean.
Yeah. And we like for us, like a lot of people are like, you're a banana, like you're, and then we're just like, what does that even mean? Like what? Like I'm a fruit. Okay, like cool, thanks.
Wow, I never heard that one, banana.
Because it's like people are like, you're yellow on the outside and like white on the inside.
Oh, okay.
And I'm just like, okay, first of all, I don't even like bananas.
No, bananas are really lit though. How do you not like bananas?
Help you with your digestion. No, it's because I ate too much bananas when I was a child.
Oh,
Like my
okay.
grandma would always be like, this is so healthy for you. And then she would just be like, she would just be constantly buying it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So like because it's healthy, you don't want to eat it.
Yeah, exactly. that association with health, with like childhood.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So how would you identify yourself as?
I personally identify as queer and also as gender nonconforming.
Mm-hmm. So how would you say your identity has impacted or has any impact with your connection with your culture and vice versa?
Yeah, I think if anything, it's brought me closer to my culture, or at least to the roots of my culture, than I
Mhm.
originally expected. I think when I was realizing like my identity and the things that I identified with at first, like to say that out loud or to like, I don't like the idea of coming out, but to come out. At first for me was like, oh, like I'm gonna distance myself from this whole like community and my culture, and I'm gonna become like this white gay like at first, and then later on I figured out like looking at more history and understanding like queer liberation and things like that. I think I got more in touch with my culture through that, because understanding that like the history of my culture, where like when the two gender like male and female gender pronouns were brought in, that was actually like during the Mongolian rule, when China became more connected to like Europeans and more European people started coming here and brought in religion. While as before that, it was just one gender pronoun that applied to everyone. So there was at one point more queer and trans people in China than not queer and trans people. So it's like that kind of culture. It's just that we never actually had that idea of like, oh, we need to label everything so that we can control everyone.
Mhm.
So I think in that sense, it was like I felt more grounded with my identity and understood my identity and like the things that I was feeling a lot more, because like we never had those things, right? And I think some
Yeah.
parts of that still exists in the culture and in everyone.
No, I feel that. You mentioned earlier that how in the beginning you just wanted to like like resemble like a white gay. Do you feel like that was not only your sentiment, that you feel that maybe other Asians feel that way
Yeah.
as well, and why do you think so?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a sentiment that a lot of other Asians, especially East Asian people, tend to also like follow by and go by, because like one is like the amount of influence that these Westerners, like these white people, have in our countries. Like I can't really speak for other like Asian countries, but for like in particular my country, for example, like during the Opium War and all of those things, like when Western imperialism was like really pushing it, the country really like fell into chaos. And after that, a lot of people were kind of wanting to adopt to kind of like what a lot of white people and like Europeans were doing because they didn't want that to happen again.
Okay.
But I think on the land here, there's also that sense of like Asians wanting to strive towards whiteness because of anti-blackness and because of like this whole model minority myth that a lot of like people at first like painted. One is like on ourselves, and like two is like white people painted on us. Is like these Asians can model for other minorities because like they can learn, they are quote unquote civilized, and all of these things, which in fact actually damaged like our ability to connect with one another.
Yeah.
And brought us closer to kind of like the very individual state that we're in.
Mm-hmm. No, I feel the same way as well with like the black community. Um, we strive to like the lighter your skin are, like the closer you are to like the supreme, which is like, you know, whiteness. And the I feel like it's like on the same level as well. It's just like different experiences on like on the different sides of the coin, which is interesting for me.
I think there's also like there's this whole narrative going around right now with like the whole oh like Asian men can be sexy too, and then taking pictures of Asian men in like the same poses and like same very like able-bodied like quote unquote fit like skinny kind of types of like Asian men, and being like, oh, Asian men can be sexy too. And that makes me feel so uncomfortable because I'm just like, so then how do you define sexy, right? Like how do you define attractive?
Mm-hmm.
And then is what you're doing right now actually trying to uplift the community, or actually just comparing us to a different standard, and then in that actually bringing us further down?
Mm-hmm. No, yeah. I agree with that, honestly.
It's such a weird...
Mm-hmm. And like a paradox, because it's just like you get what they're trying to do, but at the same time it's just like you have your own set of like standards of what beauty is. It may not be the same for someone else, so you shouldn't just project that as like one way
and
to
once
be
you
beautiful.
project it, you're actually projecting what we have that's like white supremacy. You have this whole narrative of like supremacy and what that is.
No, yeah. I totally agree with that. Did it take you like a while though to like be comfortable with your identity and be secure in like your culture as well?
I think it took quite a long time, because I get like that whole thing that a lot of Asian folks say I think really resonates with me is like when you're in elementary school, when you're in high school, especially coming as a new immigrant, already trying to like learn your own language and learn your own culture, but at the same time still having to be criticized for the food that you were bringing, even though your parents are working so hard to like make you food and still bring you food. And people are like, oh, the food smells. Like, why does your food smell? Why does your food look like that? And that whole kind of sense of like, I don't want to be associated with that. And I think the hard part of it is that like, because at the same time we also get so much toxic, abusive patterns from like our families, because of like trauma and immigration, that we almost bunch that kind of behavior with our culture itself. And then once that gets bunched together, we're almost like, hey, like I want to let that whole thing go, rather than what is actually like abusive patterns and toxic behavior, and what is actually just my culture, right? Like just my food.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, I feel that. Honestly, like anything with any type of spices or seasoning, white people are just like, it's like sun, you know?
Yeah, they see the sun and they're like, oh shit.
Oh, like spices. Oh, this smells different.
Let's season this chicken with like just salt and maybe like a tiny bit of pepper if I'm getting adventurous, like on adventurous.
Yeah. And then maybe like a spritz of lime or lemon.
A little bit of, oh my god, that's so much. You're so brave.
I can't. But yeah, no, I feel the same way too sometimes when I used to like bring homemade food to school, and then you warm it up. That's when like the flavor just like
the flavor sits out in the
dissipates
room, and
like
then people are
around
like,
the,
"What is
yeah.
that?" Yeah.
I definitely went through that phase too, and in the moment it's not fun
Yeah.
at all.
It's not fun because everyone's on, like, attention's on you, and as a newcomer, you're like, I don't want all of this. Like, I don't need this
Yeah.
attention. I just want to kind of be in a corner.
No, yeah, I totally understand. What would you say are the similarities and differences that you have noticed between like the Chinese queer community and North American?
That's a really interesting question. I think the similarities that I've noticed is that um, there's a whole notion centered around like cisgendered, heterosexual, like masculine twinks, especially
Mm-hmm.
with like just on the like cis gay side, is just like twinks and like hunks are being like really, really. This also associated with like bodies and abilities, right? Is being like lifted up, and that's the whole image of like queerness in itself. Is just these East Asian twinks who are like, oh wow, like you're so sexy, and they're like fully like sexual, and there's this hookup culture on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think on top of that, to just like sum it all up, the similarity is trauma. The similarity is that we have a lot of unspoken trauma that
What would you say is like the trauma?
the trauma, I think the trauma is one is like the masculinity, and also like at the same time this kind of sense of masculinity because patriarchy was brought in, right? And there's this sense of like patriarchy that's looming around all of these like family structures, communities, countries, cultures. And on top of it, I think is just like the fact that your families are trying to reinforce it, but at the same time, like media, whiteness, like Western culture, sees it almost like you're not masculine and you're feminine. So it's like that coming together, and then the confusion of it causing like trauma, and then at the same time, because most of queer Asian people or just a lot of Asian people in general live in like a very recent kind of post-war kind of state right now, right? Because like within the 20th century, there was like the Vietnam War. There's like all of these wars that cause so much trauma in the families that like it's still getting passed down, and I think that's something that like a lot of racialized people can like relate to, but like sometimes it goes unspoken.
Okay. And what would you say? What other like similarities that you have noticed?
Yeah, other similarities, I think, is that people are resilient and that like communities like really exist, even though like if we look at a lot of the times when we look at like communities in like China or like in all of these countries that like we view right now as like homophobic, um, we just see people being like closeted, self-hating gays, while at the same time, there's almost this unspoken thing that's like you don't necessarily need to come out to live your full self. You can still be resilient without embracing this notion of coming out, right? Because like when you're coming out, like what are you coming out to? If you're coming out into like a white, like racist society, then like are you really coming out to safety, right? Then like is there a point? So I think people are resilient because of that, and there's a lot of mutual support, even though sometimes there can be a lot of trauma wrapped in that, but there's a
Yeah.
lot of mutual support and understanding.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say like are the differences between the two?
Yeah, the difference between the two, I think there's a lot. I see a lot of queer Asian folks here almost glorifying Canada as a country, being like so like LGBTQ friendly and all of these things, like glorifying the fact that like this land is built on the genocide of like indigenous people, right? And it's built on really just getting rid of like two-spirited identities and like
Yeah.
indigenous women and all of these things, and that like these things are still going on. I mean, if we look at it, gay men can't donate blood in Canada, so why are we glorifying Like, why
Wait,
are we
what?
glorifying them?
I thought no. Are
It's
you
still
kidding
illegal.
me?
Yeah, it's still illegal here.
No way. Wow.
I think the standard is like, don't take my word for it, but the standard is you have to be abstinent for like a year for you to donate blood.
What that has to do with anything?
Right? It really has nothing to do
It's
with
like you're gonna pass down the gay, like if you don't have, if you're not gay for a
everyone's gonna be gay.
year.
We're gonna turn everyone gay. And then there's that whole thing of like, I just see it like all of these blood donation like ads that's like, oh, we really need people to donate, and I'm like, okay, then
I mean, like half of the world is queer anyway,
yeah,
so
probably more than that, honestly.
yeah,
More than that.
I'm like, what do you expect?
What do you expect, honestly?
Wow, that's so weird.
Yeah. So I think it's like overall like the differences is like that glorification, which happens sometimes, but also like outside of the cishet like gay men kind of sense. In like queer Asian folks, there's just so much of people holding each other close and still like unpacking and unlearning together, which is really that also goes into like similarities but also differences, because the way that we hold each other and the way that we talk about like our emotions and communicate these things are very different. But at the same time, there's just this love that's almost like that just exists there, right? It's like if you are there, like I hear you, I see you, I hear you, we're here for you.
No, yeah, I get that too. I feel that sometimes in like the North American community, but not the greatest, because like I feel like black people are like underneath like all of like the, it's like, oh, it's like at least I'm not like, you know, that like disadvantage or like, you know. So I feel like sometimes people embrace more our culture, like the positive outcomes of like what our culture has, like music and entertainment in general, and not really embrace us as like people. So that's where I feel like the disconnect is.
Yeah, no, I think that's really true. And especially like I almost see like a cultural difference also on that point, like between like queer Asians in Asia, especially like in East Asia, and like queer Asians in like North America, whereas like queer Asians in North America are almost like a lot of, especially like gay men are embracing like this whole like white queer culture, which is at the same time taken from like black women and then taken from like black queers.
Speak on it.
And then at the
Speak
same
on
time,
it.
like, I'm just like, what are all of you doing if you're just going to take this culture and then
Not credit anyone.
and then not credit it and then say that, oh, like we have this whole culture, like we're resilient. It's like, what are you trying to do? While as like queer Asian people like in Asia actually has a culture, actually have their own things, like actually have their own forms of art, right? Like there's even traditional forms of drag within like Chinese culture. If you look at like Chinese operas and stuff,
Okay.
right? A lot of the times that's like men cross-dressing and playing in like drag characters, while as like here, it's a different story with drag, where not saying that all like gay Asian men do drag here like are problematic, but a lot of them like say yes like every 3 seconds, and then there's this whole idea of like, oh, we're just gonna like we're gonna embrace like what a black woman does, and it's
But not actually embrace
not actually
and
not,
what a
not
black
embracing
woman.
like Black Lives Matter, not embracing like all of these things that needs to be actually addressed. Yeah.
No, yeah. That's how I always like to ask like other people who are like in other different like minority groups how society interacts with their culture and their race. It's always it's interesting because like there's differences but there's also similarities too. And like if we all just notice that, right?
We can all just notice them and be like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do this one thing.
Yeah, like the world will be such
Like maybe
a better place.
think a little bit.
You know?
Yeah.
Just maybe just a little bit. Just
Tiny
stop
bit,
and
tiny
think
bit.
before you
Yeah.
speak or do any type of action. No. But you mentioned that you're a community worker, right?
Yeah.
What are like some of the projects that you have? been a part of?
Yeah, so right now I am a youth worker. So I rather than a traditional kind of youth worker where you do a lot of like recreation and settlement programs with youth, I am running a social justice leadership program with racialized youth, um, which is it's also constantly changing. But I like after running a full kind of phase of it this past fall. Um, we realized that like yes it's important to address kind of like oppression and talk about oppression and talk about all of these social issues with youth and especially racialized youth, but that at the same time they're fed up. Like the reason we need to stop saying like these youth are apathetic and that they don't care, because it's not because they don't care, it's because they've been ignored for so long and they've been called entitled and ignored and their problems has been ignored, and they're living in this generation where there's no stable jobs. Everything is precarious. The environment is precarious. They don't even know what their future is going to look like for their environment. So then stop expecting them to do your biddings in terms of like even political work and stuff like that when none of the options actually benefit them. So my role is kind of to also like address that power dynamic and talk about that, and to create that space where youth can learn about themselves, whether it is that they want to get involved in like organizing and like activism and this kind of like active work, or if they just want a space to like talk and heal and cope, because I think both of those spaces don't exist for youth right now. So my job is to like, kind of like create those spaces. Does that? Yeah.
No, yeah, no, that makes sense. I understand that, and that's like I appreciate that honestly, because in this day and age, just because you have like the internet and then you can post like everything you feel and it's public doesn't mean that it's always a positive outlet. You know, most of the times it's not the outcome is not always the most positive. You know.
Yeah, and I think sometimes that's almost like a coping mechanism for so
Mhm.
much youth, because they're experiencing so much, for the lack of better terms, shit from like this
You
whole
can
society.
swear, like, come on now.
Yeah, so they experience so much shit that they're like, we just want somewhere where we can get the confidence, and you search for confidence in places where everyone has a lack of confidence, right? And often sometimes that the results is good and it's helpful, but other times shit happens.
Yeah, no, I feel that. And in like the field that you have been in like the many years, or I don't know how long have you been working in this field, but have you faced like any challenges in maybe in terms of like funding or receiving support in certain ideas that you have?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of challenges in this field, even though I'm very new to this field, so I can't speak on that much in terms of the field. But I think there's a lot of challenges in terms of just getting, as simple as it sounds, getting organizations to take a stance on issues. Because a lot of the times, like, you're working with immigrants, you're working with racialized folks, indigenous folks, black folks. But at the same time, you're afraid to take an issue when, like, gun violence happens. You're afraid to take a stance on an issue when, like, when the government is trying to erase like trans identities. Like,
Uh-huh.
if you're gonna say that you're gonna support these people, actually support these people rather than just doing it for like the numbers and stats, right?
Mhm.
Because I think right now, like a lot of nonprofits are working in order to get funding. They're working to sustain their funding and to sustain the work that they do. While it's like, if these oppression and all of these systems don't exist, then nonprofits don't need to exist. So it's almost like I feel like nonprofits should be working to not exist. If by the time you can not exist and people will be able to get these services and or not have to get these services in order to survive and grow, then I think that's almost like the ideal fact, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I feel that honestly. Um
And I think, I guess, going into another challenge, especially with like youth work, is that we rely way too much on just giving youth volunteer hours. Right now we're just always like, oh, like you need volunteer hours, schools need volunteer hours, I'm just gonna say like you can do this and this and this just for volunteer hours, while at the same time we're getting them to do the exact same work that paid workers are doing, right? Like we're not valuing what youth are actually doing. And that happens sometimes to like community members too that are getting involved with nonprofits, is that we're not compensating them for their time while they're doing, if not more work for the actual organization. So like even with my youth, like they're getting so much volunteer hours. They're getting like over the volunteer hours that they actually need. They don't need the volunteer hours. They need support. They need access to power. They need access to like stable finances and all of these things. You can't just say like, oh, like thank you for doing all of this, I'll just give you volunteer hours. Because if you're just going to keep saying like, if you don't have volunteer hours, you can't work, or you can't go to university, or you can't get an education, then what about the people who grew up in more like marginalized communities and families where they don't have access to the time to even do volunteer work, right? Then who has access to jobs in university? And it's just this whole cycle of like, oh, we're going to get youth to do art stuff for us. We're going to get them to do this. They'll just get like a recognition for their name. While like we're paying other artists like hundreds of dollars per hour, often like white artists, like hundreds of dollars an hour to just paint like a mural.
A line,
right?
Yeah.
So it's like, I think what I tell my youth is like, when they ask you to do something, know their intention. If their intention is to actually get you somewhere, then like do it. Or if you actually need to have your name recognized, do it. But if you don't, like, feel free to say no, because these adults are trying to use you. Like you all know that they're trying to use you.
Point blank, period.
Right? Yeah.
No, it really is true. And it's very telling of the organization that you're planning to like do a volunteer or whatever, do anything. Like it's very telling on their part if they're just like using the youth because they know that that's their scapegoat to get like a certain type of work out across like a deadline or whatever.
Deadlines and like timelines and numbers and stuff.
And it's just like a kid, like they're not even, they're a kid, they're not even
a kid trying to survive.
Adult.
Like literally it's a kid trying to survive.
Exactly, like they're not an adult yet, like society hasn't, the real life hasn't hit them yet, like they don't even know how like the concept of like the society that we live in, like how fucked up it is. And then you're just like doing this.
Exactly. And like I think a lot of like, especially in the fields of like art, because a lot of my youth do like art stuff and want to do art, we often just don't credit youth enough for the art that they do, right? Like they are trying to do art and they're already having enough of this whole imposter syndrome that's hitting them. And then you're here like, oh, we'll just give you recognition, we're not going to pay you. Like you're feeding more into that. So if you're saying that you want to give youth more confidence to use their voice, then like actually maybe do it.
Maybe listening.
Maybe like actually listen to what they need. Like, yes, you're here to support them and putting their art onto like a display board. But where are you when they are struggling to find the time and the materials to actually practice their art? Where are you when they're at home, like struggling with mental health, to actually get out of their bed to practice their art or to just even express themselves, right? Like, where are you in those fields?
Exactly. It's just like volunteer hours is great too, but like also I feel like they should also maybe implement taking advantage of the services that are being offered in those establishments while they're volunteering for free. Like, that's the least that you can do.
Yeah. Because I think like, especially as like nonprofit organizations, we have access to so many things. But like, if we have access to all of these things, why are we just trying to hold it to ourselves so that we can outcompete other nonprofits? Well, it's like, what is actually our mission? If our mission is to support communities, then why are we trying to outcompete each other for funding? Right?
No, yeah, I totally get it.
Yeah.
Do you think that there is enough diversity in your field?
That's a very good question. I think there is absolutely not.
Why?
A lot of the times,
how come?
Yeah, a lot of the times, like, I mean, even just speaking with my coworkers and stuff like that, seeing who's like, yes, there are all of these racialized workers, all of these women of colors working in these spaces, but like diversity also means that they're able to thrive, right? So it's like if you are hiring all of these women of color to show off that you have a diverse workplace, but you're not paying them properly, then do you have diversity, right?
Exactly.
And then at the same time, like if you look at the people who are empowered in like directors' roles who are talking about diversity, they all pretty much look like Justin Trudeau
Yeah.
or like everyone in his family. So it's like what does it mean to be diverse, right? Because I think an organization often is just like, oh, we have all of these racialized workers, we're diverse. But it's like they're all in precarious situations. Yeah. They all are on contract. While like you're sitting here talking about diversity with like a 6-figure salary with a full-time job that's permanent, right? Like who gets to talk about diversity? And I think also in this field, even though there's a lot of racialized people like being hired, again, going back to that trauma aspect, because they have so much trauma, they also tend to, one is that they rely on, a lot of them are newcomers, right? Who's been with the organization, volunteered with the organization. So because they volunteer for the organization for so long, they already have no boundaries. Because sometimes they just take their work and they're like, oh, we're going to give you volunteer hours. Yeah. So when they get their work, they get their job, they have even less boundaries. Mm-hmm. So people would just put all of this work on them without paying them, even though they're only paid to do a certain amount of work. And then at the same time, when they get into higher positions, they also replicate the same power dynamics. So it's like this whole sense of like, oh, we're a nonprofit, we work like a family, we're like a family that do work together, we're all close, we're all tight. But at the same time, it's exploitative. Mm-hmm. So it's like, why are you saying that you're a family when you're exploiting everyone in it, right? And this whole idea of like saying that we're a family, we're like a close-knit organization, and like the bosses and the people under them are like close friends, is to just hold on to their ability to complain, right, about not being treated fairly. Because it's like, oh, do you want to actually help your people? Then do all of this extra work.
Yeah.
But it's like, actually pay your workers fairly, right?
No, I honestly, it's just like that's the idea, or like the image, the package that they want to like present. Yeah. But what's really going on is like the complete opposite. Because it's like, how can you say that your a non-profit organization is diverse, that the people who are at the top are all white?
Yeah, exactly.
There's a bit of disconnect.
There's something wrong there. Like, even though maybe like there's like 80 people working under you that are like racialized, but if you have like 4 white people as directors, then I don't necessarily think that's direct. That still looks like what the government looks like. That still looks like everything. Yeah. Everything else in society right now. Yeah.
No, it's very true. So we're coming to like the end of the podcast. And towards the end, I usually ask my guests what's their queer awkward moment. It doesn't have to be a queer moment, it could be an awkward moment.
Yeah, so I'm a very awkward person, if you haven't noticed. So awkward moments happen all the time. Mm-hmm. But this is something that like it's been sitting with me for a long time. This is more like a childhood awkward moment. Okay. But so like, because I'm a Cancer, I'm a Cancer rising, I have Scorpio in my sign, like I'm just very like, I want to help everything when I was little, at least. So then like when I was little, in China we have like baby chicks as like pets. So I lived on the 7th floor, and like my grandma got me these like baby chicks as pets, and I was like, oh, they look so lonely in this box. And then I wanted them to be free. So basically I put them like on the window, and I was like, oh, you're free now, you can fly. And I thought chickens could fly this whole time. And then, so you can guess what happened next. But basically they flew down the building. And my grandma looked horrified when she saw me doing that. Like I turned around, I was like, are you proud of me? And she was like, yeah. And then like 2 years later, when I actually got into elementary school, when I was like learning that chickens can't fly, like I started crying in the middle of the class, and I ran out of the classroom. And then everyone else was like, what's wrong with you? Like, what's happening?
Yeah.
So I think like my awkwardness is like deeply rooted in me.
Yeah, you were triggered
Yeah,
when the teacher brought it up.
Yeah. I was really like, oh shit. Like,
I just murdered.
I messed up. I fucked up. I'm gonna repent for the rest of my life for those baby tricks.
Oh man, that's hilarious. Man, can you imagine just like being that little in class and then like your teacher brings that up and then you just sit there and realize that you just murdered a couple of chickens.
And I couldn't even like, the thing is I would have seen it, but I couldn't see over the window because I was too short. So
Okay.
like, you're free now, like go home, fly to your mom's, bye.
Oh man, R.I.P. to those
That was the last time that I've ever seen them again.
to those little chickens. May their souls live on.
Yeah.
That's a good way to end this episode. An ode to the chicken.
To the chickens.
To that chicken
live
that you
forever.
murdered in cold blood.
Rest in peace.
So thanks for tuning in to this week's episode, and thank you, Bill, for stopping by.
Yeah, thank you so much for this. This was really nice.
No problem. Do you have like anywhere you would like people to find you, or?
I'm taking a social media like break right now, or I'm a bit less active. So, find me on Facebook if you want to chat about any of these issues. My name is Bill XU. Feel free to shoot me a message, but otherwise, just talk to me on Facebook.
No, I get it too. Like sometimes you need to have like, just like a social media purge, like just a break.
Yeah, and I'm also working on kind of like rebranding, like what social media really means for me, or like what I want from it.
Okay.
So that's we'll figure out like where this is gonna go, but yeah,
okay.
Work in progress.
No, I feel that. Sometimes you just need like, you just need to take a step back from all of that.
Yeah.
It's
very
loud.
It's a
yeah,
lot.
it is.
I see pictures of chickens on the internet and I'm like, oh shit.
Anyways, thanks for listening.
Thank
Until
you.
next time, stay awkward.